It started with a crumpled piece of paper. For Mark Rumsfeld, it was just another Tuesday when he found an unexpected receipt in his wallet. Thin and folded, he didn't remember it. The paper was worn, the ink faded. The logo, Oratech, was unfamiliar. Beneath it, a list of items and a total of over $300. The date sent a shiver down his spine. It was dated for the following week, an impossible future date. He almost threw it away, but something stopped him. An instinct that told him this piece of paper was important. He decided to keep it. It was the beginning. Life tried to return to normal. Mark buried himself in work, but the receipt kept surfacing. He searched for Oratech online, but found nothing. Then came May 31st. Driving home, he detoured to an electronics store for a cable. He saw it. Oratech. His blood ran cold. He slammed on the brakes. Inside, he saw the Chrono Filter V7 and quantum data cable. The items from the receipt. He bought them. The new receipt was identical to the old one. The world felt terrifying. The drive home was a blur. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was a pawn in some game. He found the original receipt and laid it next to the new one. They were perfect duplicates. He had received a receipt for a transaction a week before it took place. The world he knew had been shattered. What did it mean? A few days later, another receipt appeared. Another piece of crumpled paper was tucked behind his driver's license. This one was different, from a local hardware store. Printed below the future date was a name, Laura Hayes. The receipt listed a time and location, Crestwood Park, and the item purchased, shovel. This felt sinister, like a warning, or worse, a threat. It was a harbinger of something terrible to come. The coffee shop buzzed. But for Mark, it was all just distant noise. He sat in his car holding the receipt. Laura Hayes. Crestwood Park. 11:47 p.m. Shovel. This was about a person. How could anyone have planted this receipt in his wallet? The proof was right there. The feeling of being watched returned. The quiet of his house now felt oppressive. He went to his computer. He typed the name Laura Hayes into the search bar. But there she was. A smiling woman. Laura Hayes. A high school teacher. Seeing her face made it all too real. A person whose life might be in danger. The weight of that knowledge was crushing. What was he supposed to do? Mark spent a sleepless night, haunted by the receipt and Laura Hayes' smiling face. He tried to distract himself at a diner but overheard a waitress mention Laura Hayes had gone missing. Her car found abandoned, police searching. The date on the receipt was for tomorrow, but Laura was already gone. Mark realized the receipt wasn't a prediction but a grim echo of something already in motion. Relief faded, replaced by a deeper dread. Mark rushed home reading news confirming Laura's disappearance. The receipt's details, her name, the park, the time, felt less like a warning and more like a schedule for something worse. He understood. The receipt pointed to what would happen next, not what had already happened. Now he held evidence of a crime in progress. Fear warred with responsibility. He knew he had to act, even if it meant becoming a suspect. Mark resolved he couldn't stay silent. As Saturday night fell, Mark's anxiety peaked. He gathered the receipts, rehearsed his story, and drove to the police station. Doubt gnawed at him. Would they believe him or see him as a suspect? But he couldn't ignore the knowledge he carried. Mark stepped out of his car, clutching the evidence, and walked toward the station's harsh lights. He was committed now, for better or worse. Inside the police station, Mark nervously explained everything to Detective Shaw. The story sounded unbelievable, but Mark insisted it was true, showing his search history and the receipts. Shaw listened, skeptical but attentive, then left Mark alone in the interview room. Mark waited, anxiety mounting, uncertain if he'd just ruined his life or saved someone else's. All he could do was hope. Shaw returned with a partner. They questioned Mark, scrutinized the receipts, and checked his story. No record of Laura Hayes or a shovel purchase existed at the hardware store. The detectives pressed Mark, but he stuck to his account, growing more desperate. Finally, they told him not to leave town, they'd investigate further. Mark left the station, the police skeptical but now involved. The investigation and Mark's nightmare had truly begun. That night, Mark lay in bed, unable to sleep. The faces of the detectives haunted him, their skepticism gnawing at his resolve. He kept replaying the conversation, second-guessing every word. His phone buzzed with news alerts. Nothing about Laura Hayes, nothing about Crestwood Park. The world outside his window was silent, but inside, his mind was a storm. He wondered what the police were doing now. Would they patrol the park, stake out the hardware store? Or would they write him off as a crank, his evidence tossed into an evidence locker and forgotten? Meanwhile, in a cramped evidence room, the detectives pored over the receipts. The Oratech receipt matched a real transaction in Mark's name. Except the store had no public record before the day Mark purchased the items. The hardware store receipt, by contrast, was a ghost. No matching sale, no trace of Laura Hayes in the system, and no CCTV footage of anyone fitting Mark's description anywhere near the location. The deeper they looked, the stranger it got. Shaw ordered a background check on Mark, combed through his digital footprint. Nothing stood out, no criminal record, no history of mental illness, nothing at all, except a trail of Google searches about missing people, true crime, and, chillingly, how to report a crime before it happens. As Sunday ticked towards midnight, police cars prowled the dark roads near Crestwood Park. Shaw had decided to take no chances. He sent a patrol to the park, officers combing the shadows with high-powered flashlights, boots crunching on gravel. The park was empty. No Laura Hayes, no shovel, no sign of a crime. But still, the sense of unease lingered. Shaw felt it in his gut, a feeling that the pieces didn't add up, that something was happening just out of sight. The question circled in his mind: was this all a prank, or the first ripple in a much larger, darker pattern? Back in his house, Mark sat in the dark, watching the clock. 11:47 p.m. came and went. Nothing. No sirens, no news, no new receipts. He should have been relieved, but the fear didn't fade. If the crime didn't happen, did that mean he'd stopped it? Or was the receipt still predicting something just beyond his grasp? Something that might strike when no one was watching? Monday morning brought a new kind of dread. Mark checked the news, scrolling endlessly for any sign of Laura Hayes. She was still missing. The receipt, his impossible evidence, remained in police custody, a mystery with no answers. Mark's phone rang. It was Detective Shaw. His voice was wary, but softer than before. "We need to talk." Mark drove back to the precinct, nerves raw. Shaw led him to a different room this time, less intimidating, but the tension still hung heavy in the air. Shaw slid a new folder across the table. Overnight, a ranger had found a freshly dug patch of dirt in Crestwood Park, right at the GPS coordinates listed on the receipt. Inside, police discovered a shovel, wiped clean but still dusted with soil. There was no sign of Laura, but the scene had been disturbed. Evidence markers dotted the ground like warning signs. The detectives were rattled. Mark's information, impossible as it was, had led to a real discovery. "You're either the luckiest guesser I've ever met," Shaw said quietly, "or there's something happening here we can't explain." Mark felt a chill spread through him. The receipts, they weren't just predicting events, they were guiding the investigation. Shaw asked again, had anyone approached Mark, sent him anything? Were there more receipts? Mark shook his head, but inside he wasn't sure. He felt watched, as if the next scrap of paper could appear at any moment. The police kept the shovel and the new evidence, officially opening a homicide investigation. Mark was now a person of interest, a reluctant oracle for crimes that hadn't yet happened. As he left the station, Mark glanced at his phone. There it was, a notification, a new message, no sender, just a picture, another receipt, another name, another location, another date. Mark's blood ran cold. The pattern was repeating, and whatever was happening, it was far from over. The evidence from the future was real. The question now was, could anyone stop what was coming next? The next few days were an agonizing limbo for Mark. He was now a key figure in an active police investigation. He stayed home, jumping every time his phone buzzed. Detectives called periodically, a constant reminder that he was linked to Laura Hayes' fate. He felt like a prisoner, haunted by her smiling face. Detective Shaw wrestled with paradoxical evidence. Mark's story was insane, yet it led them to a freshly dug hole. Flyers with her face appeared, her kind eyes looking out. He felt the weight of a new receipt burning a hole in his digital pocket. This time, the receipt was for a different person. It felt like a countdown clock. Mark knew he had to tell the police, but he kept hesitating. The clock kept ticking, pushing him toward a terrible choice. It was a Tuesday evening when Mark's phone rang. The caller ID was blocked. His heart hammered as he stared at the screen. He answered. He listened. "Mark Rumsfeld?" The voice was distorted, robotic. This was the source of his nightmare. "You have not shared the information with Detective Shaw. The subject's life depends on your compliance." They were watching him. "Report the contents of the receipt to the authorities immediately. There will be no further warnings." The line went dead. The call had changed everything. He had to make another trip to the police station. While Mark received his call, Detective Shaw followed a tip about a car parked near the tree line the night Laura Hayes disappeared. It was a vintage dark green sedan. Shaw dispatched a team to search Crestwood Park, expanding into the dense woods. An officer found a patch of ground covered with branches. Underneath, they discovered a dig site. Buried in the shallow grave was Laura Hayes. The impossible receipt had been right about the location. Shaw looked at the coordinates from the receipt and the gravesite. They were a perfect match. The evidence was undeniable. The news broke late that night. It was the lead story on every local channel. "Body of missing teacher found," the headlines blared. For Mark Rumsfeld, it was confirmation of his deepest fears. He saw the police tape and Detective Shaw speaking to reporters. The receipt hadn't been a prediction, but a map to a grave. The horrifying truth settled in. He was being used. Someone was committing these acts and sending him the evidence. Was he being framed? His phone buzzed. It was Detective Shaw. "Mark, we need you to come in. Now." At the station, he told them everything, showing them the newest receipt. It was for a gun. The room fell silent. The horrifying truth was that Laura Hayes wasn't the end. She was just the beginning. The police station buzzed with urgency. The third receipt transformed the case into a race against time. Detective Shaw now relied on Mark, their only link to the killer. He received messages from the unseen architect of these crimes. Investigators worked through the night and ran the name from the third receipt, David Chen. Surveillance was set up at the pawn shop. The department acted on information from Mark's phone. Mark sat detached, watching the police flurry around him. Why him? Was it a genius killer playing a game? They were dealing with an architect manipulating events at will. Mark Rumsfeld was their chosen instrument. The terror was just escalating. The pawn shop sat on a grimy street. Its neon sign flickered. This was the location from the third receipt. Inside, undercover detectives posed as customers. Outside, a perimeter was set. Unmarked cars waited for David Chen, the man named on the receipt. It was a trap. Mark Rumsfeld was in a mobile command unit. He stared at monitors displaying feeds from the pawn shop. They were chasing a ghost. Then, a figure turned the corner. A man matching David Chen's description walked toward the pawn shop. Subject is on approach. In the command unit, all eyes were on the monitor. This was it. David Chen was walking right into the center of it. As David Chen stepped inside the pawn shop, the undercover officers tensed. He moved with a nervous energy, his eyes darting around the store, avoiding contact. He approached the counter, and the hidden microphones picked up his low, gravelly voice. He wanted to buy a gun. A cheap, untraceable handgun. The transaction was exactly as the receipt had foretold. Before the sale could be completed, the tactical team was given the signal. They swarmed the entrance, weapons drawn, shouting commands. The scene was over in seconds. David Chen was on the ground, hands cuffed behind his back, a look of pure shock and confusion on his face. He never saw it coming. Back in the interrogation room, Chen was a mess of contradictions. He was belligerent, then terrified, then sullen and silent. He denied everything. He knew nothing about Laura Hayes. He had no idea why the police were so interested in his attempt to buy a gun. He claimed he just needed it for protection. But when the detectives pressed him, asking who told him to go to that specific pawn shop on that specific day, his story began to crumble. He swore he didn't know. The instruction he claimed had just appeared. An anonymous text message on his burner phone, giving him the address and a time, promising a good deal. The tech team went to work on Chen's phone. It was a dead end. The text message had been sent through a series of encrypted rerouted servers, a digital maze designed to be untraceable. It was a ghost in the wires, a message from nowhere. It was the same sophisticated, frustrating pattern they had seen before. The killer, this unseen architect, was a master of technology, able to manipulate people and events without ever showing their face. They were leaving a trail of digital breadcrumbs that led only to more questions, more shadows, more dead ends. The feeling of fighting an invisible enemy was stronger than ever. For Mark, the arrest was a small, hollow victory. A crime had been stopped, a life potentially saved. But it brought him no closer to understanding his own role in this terrifying drama. If anything, it deepened the mystery. The killer was now using him to direct the police, to take their own pawns off the board. Why? Was it a game, a test, or was the architect cleaning up loose ends, using the authorities as their personal cleanup crew? The arrest of David Chen wasn't the end of a chapter. It felt like the beginning of a new, more complicated one, where the lines between hunter and hunted were becoming terrifyingly blurred. The arrest of David Chen sent ripples through the investigation, but it didn't bring them any closer to the core of the mystery. Under intense questioning, Chen finally broke. He admitted he wasn't just buying a gun for protection. He had been hired anonymously to do a job. He was supposed to silence a loose end from another crime. He didn't know the victim's name, only that he would receive instructions later. The connection was chillingly clear. He was likely hired to eliminate someone connected to the Laura Hayes murder. The architect wasn't just committing crimes. They were actively managing the fallout, using layers of cutouts and anonymous messages to keep their own hands clean. This revelation changed everything. The police weren't just chasing a single killer anymore. They were up against a network, a conspiracy. The gyre was widening, pulling more and more people into its vortex. The case file grew thicker, filled with names, locations, and pieces of evidence that felt both random and intimately connected. They had David Chen, a hired gun. They had Laura Hayes, the victim. And they had Mark Rumsfeld, the unwilling prophet. 3 disparate lives tangled together by a series of impossible receipts sent by an entity that remained a complete and utter ghost. The scope of the operation was terrifying. For Mark, life had become a surreal waiting game. He was in protective custody, moved to a nondescript hotel room with a detective stationed outside his door. His quiet, predictable life was a distant memory. He spent his days replaying every moment, every receipt, every synthesized word from the phone call, searching for a clue he might have missed. He felt like a lab rat, studied and observed, his only purpose to wait for the next piece of impossible mail to arrive. The fear was constant, a low hum beneath the surface of everything. He was a target, a tool, and a witness, all at once. More receipts began to appear, not just for Mark. A patrol officer found one on the windshield of his cruiser. A city councilwoman found one in her mailbox. A journalist covering the case found one on her desk. They all pointed to small, seemingly insignificant future events. A traffic accident, a minor robbery, a data breach at a local company. The architect was expanding their reach, spreading chaos and fear, demonstrating their power. It was no longer just about Mark. The entire city was now a pawn in their game. The chase was on, but it felt like they were chasing a phantom who was always 10 steps ahead, and the next crime could be anywhere, aimed at anyone. Portland remained on edge. The receipts had stopped, leaving behind solved petty crimes. The murder of Laura Hayes remained a mystery. The ghost had gone silent. Mark Rumsfeld was released, returning to a life no longer his own. One evening a text arrived from an unknown number. It was a receipt from Auratech. The receipt listed final deletion paid in full, a date 1 year from today, GPS coordinates for his home office. The name, Mark Rumsfeld. He was staring at his own scheduled termination. The architect had been waiting for the final move. The final receipt changed everything. It wasn't a warning about someone else. It wasn't a clue to another crime. It was a direct threat. A death sentence with a delivery date. Mark immediately took it to Detective Shaw. The police, who had been frustrated by the cold trail, were jolted back into high alert. This was the first direct communication from the architect in months, and it was the most terrifying one yet. They analyzed the text message, the image, the metadata. But just like before, it was a ghost. The number was a spoofed dead end. The image contained no hidden data. It was a message from a phantom, a whisper from the void. The investigation was thrown into a new kind of chaos. Was this the end game? Was the architect's entire plan leading to this single final act? Theories flew around the precinct. Was Mark the intended final victim all along? Was he being punished for his role, for successfully helping the police? Or was this the ultimate act of cruelty, forcing a man to live for a year with the knowledge of his own impending death? The why him question burned brighter and more desperately than ever. They dug deeper into Mark's life, his past, his work, searching for any connection, however remote, to Laura Hayes, to David Chen, to advanced technology, to anything that could explain his selection. They found nothing. He was, by all accounts, a random choice. The story remains unsolved, a chilling, modern folktale whispered among true crime enthusiasts and internet sleuths. The architect was never identified, the technology behind the receipts was never understood, the motive was never uncovered. It is a case without a conclusion, a riddle without an answer. It challenges our understanding of the world, blurring the lines between crime and science fiction, between human cruelty and something else. It suggests a world operating on rules we don't understand, where information can travel through time, and a life can be erased with the cold finality of a cash register receipt. The receipt itself sits in an evidence locker, a piece of paper that defies explanation. It is the central artifact of an impossible crime, a prophecy of a future that may or may not come to pass. Is it a genuine threat from a technologically advanced killer? Or is it the final, twisted psychological torment in a game designed to break a man's mind? The police have no answers. They can only watch and wait. The unsolvable riddle of the receipts from the future has left a permanent scar on the city, a reminder that there are some shadows that no amount of light can ever fully penetrate. And what of Mark Rumsfeld? He lives in a state of perpetual twilight, a man haunted by a future date on a calendar. He exists in a prison of his own knowledge, each sunrise one day closer to his scheduled deletion. The police offered him relocation, a new identity in the witness protection program. But he refused. He argued that if the architect could find him to send a text, they could find him anywhere. There is no running from a ghost who knows the future, so he remains in his house, the very place marked as the scene of his final moments. A quiet, defiant act in the face of an incomprehensible threat. His life is a series of rituals. He has fortified his home with cameras and alarms, a futile attempt to apply conventional security to an unconventional threat. He rarely goes out. He works, he eats, he sleeps, all under the shadow of the final receipt. Some days are filled with a paralyzing fear, a dread so profound he can barely move. On other days, a strange, calm acceptance settles over him. He has become a philosopher of his own demise, contemplating the nature of fate, free will, and the terrifying knowledge he has been given. Is his end predetermined, or does the warning itself give him the power to change it? The question that lingers, the one that keeps Detective Shaw awake at night and fuels endless online forums, is a simple one. What will happen on that day? Will the police surround the house only to find nothing? Was it all just the ultimate psychological prank? Or will the architect, after all this time, finally reveal themselves? Will the impossible happen, exactly as the receipt foretold? Will a life be deleted, paid for in full, leaving behind only another unsolvable mystery? We don't know. We can only watch and wait and wonder. The story of the receipts from the future is not over. It is paused, waiting for its final, chilling chapter to be written. Mark Rumsfeld is still waiting. The police are still waiting. And we are waiting with them. Today is May 24th, 2024. The date on Mark's receipt is exactly 1 year from today. The countdown has begun. And the most terrifying question of all remains: can you stop a crime when the evidence is from the future?